Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking to you here in my basement in the great state of Kansas. Today I'm doing a deep dive on the band Genesis. Yes, a band I started in actually 1969, basically, or the first album came out in 69. Really started to get some famous in the 70s through their prog rock. Peter Gabriel was their lead singer. Then they changed singers to Phil Collins, and then once we get to the 80s, they changed to more of a pop rock band and had the most success pretty much in the 80s, had a huge successful kind of pop albums, pop songs in that time period. Anyway, so it's a very interesting band that I've just gotten to recently before I did this deep dive anyway. So definitely one of those bands I didn't grow up listening to, didn't know anything about. And definitely a cool discovery. You know, I can see why some are huge fans of this band. Anyway, so I'll get more into my thoughts on the band and their albums and go through the highlights of their career here on Jason the Old Millennial. Hello everybody, hope everybody's doing well here on a Saturday night. It's been kind of crazy couple hours as I was preparing to do this video actually, and I was kind of doing my research on the band Genesis to make sure all my notes were, you know, up to date and ready for this video and make sure I was ready for it. I got a text that President Donald Trump was shot at a rally, but he was okay, and man, I was shocked. Like, you don't expect to hear that, you know, or you don't want to hear that happening into any political candidate, you know. And yeah, so I've been watching the news, you know, just kind of seeing what happened, and Donald Trump is luckily okay. I'm happy that, you know, he just got injured, it looks like, in the ear. And man, what a close call. I mean, that would have been disastrous for a major political candidate. We haven't had one get assassinated since 1963 with President Kennedy being assassinated while he was president, and we hadn't had a really close call since probably Ronald Reagan was shot in the early 80s. So, you know, it's very scary. Hopefully everything will be okay, but we'll see anyway. So I've been dealing with that for the last couple hours, but I wanted to get this video done. I did a poll recently about what band people wanted me to do a deep dive on next. Genesis won the poll, which I was kind of surprised. I didn't know how, I guess there's a big enough fandom in my subscribers that they wanted me to talk about Genesis. So I thought that was interesting. Because Genesis is not a band I feel like is as mainstream as some of the other bands on my list, like Led Zeppelin, like Aerosmith, are a little more mainstream, I think. Genesis, I don't think is as well known, at least it wasn't to me growing up. And I really didn't know anything about Genesis till this last year or so. I kind of started listening to Genesis and kind of catching up on that band. So yeah, so it's interesting to get into Genesis. And it's always cool to discover. This is one of those times where I got to discover a kind of a band for the first time and really get to know why are they a big deal, so to say, and what makes them a big deal. You know, I love doing that. Love researching and love going through their albums and kind of getting a sense of the band and all that anyways. But yeah, Genesis is a band I never heard of growing up, and now I know. I've heard some of their songs on the radio, didn't realize it was Genesis. I think I realized now. But if you told me a Genesis song, I would say I have no idea. I don't know a Genesis song. You know, in fact, the songs that are Genesis songs, I just assumed were Phil Collins songs because Phil Collins sings on them. So I knew Phil Collins growing up. I'm a big fan of Phil Collins. Love his solo work. I didn't know the difference between solo work and his work with Genesis is the only thing. And now I have more of an idea of that after going through this. But yeah, I really didn't know anything except that I heard that Phil Collins used to be a lead singer of Genesis. That's like the only thing I think I knew was, oh, there's this obscure band named Genesis, and Phil Collins used to be the lead singer before he went solo and had a huge solo career. Because all I knew was Phil Collins' solo career, and I really loved his solo career, love a lot. In fact, I'm gonna do a deep dive on him probably before too long. After this, maybe I'll do a deep dive on Phil Collins next, because I do love his stuff as well. Anyways, but yeah, so it wasn't until I started this YouTube channel and started doing more research on bands and trying to listen to more albums and listen to bands I didn't know much about, and kind of get to know, bands that people really enjoy that I didn't know much about. And the group that I'm kind of in, we kind of have this, group I have this group with Scott from Sound Lab Studios and Scrap Dog Records, Briar from Briar's Music Showcase, Nick from Townsend 505, and also Adam from What the Gym, and Jacob Martin. We kind of have this group, also Tyler, but I don't think he has a YouTube channel. I think I mentioned everybody, but we kind of have this musical group. We do a lot of collaborations together. And it was through them that I learned about Genesis. I think I know Briar is a huge fan of Genesis. I remember him on his music videos, him talking about, or on his YouTube channel, talking a lot about Genesis, and he's a pretty big fan. And then I know Nick and Scott lately have been, well, maybe not lately, but more lately, it feels like those two have become really huge fans of Genesis. And so Genesis is definitely a band that I keep hearing the other people in my group talk about and how much they love it. Anyway, so definitely Genesis was definitely one of those bands I was like, I really need to delve into Genesis and to their albums, because I haven't heard any of their albums yet. And, and I need to see what the big deal is, why everybody's talking about Genesis in my little group, and all that. Anyway, so definitely one of those bands are in my back of my mind that I really wanted to get into. Didn't know if I'd like them, but still wanted to see what was going on. So actually, as a group, we kind of do this sometimes. We do a whole discographies now, but we used to just take random albums and do album reviews. Anyways, and one of the albums reviews we did was Invisible Touch by Genesis. They kind of wanted to do a Genesis album, and they thought Invisible Touch would be the best album for me to be the first album for me to listen to. And because they thought this is definitely the most commercial sounding album that I would like. Anyway, so Invisible Touch was the first album I got into, and I absolutely loved it. Of course, and there's like 3 hits on there on the radio that I'm like, oh wow, didn't know I know these 3 songs. So I actually did know some Genesis, didn't realize it, that they had these 3 big hits off this album coming on the radio. And so I came away going, wow, this is a great pop, rock record. Like, I love this, And the funny thing is, Invisible Touch is like 3rd from last album. I mean, this is towards the end of the Genesis, and that's when they were having their most success, evidently. And they're making their music that I like the most. Because the early music was more prog rock, which I don't like prog rock, so I'm not really into the early Genesis, but I'm into the later Genesis when it was more the pop rock style. Anyway, so that was my introduction, which was a great introduction for me, though it wasn't a total representative of the band. It's still, I would say, it's definitely a great album to first get into, is Invisible Touch, in my opinion. So after that, I was like really interested in getting into them, and definitely was planning on doing a Genesis deep dive at some point. And since it won the poll, I'm getting to get to do it now, be my next deep dive, what I'm doing today. So saying all that, let's get into the kind of the career of Genesis and what happened with the band, and how because it does change members, change style and all that. So a lot of interesting stuff here. Like I said, for a band that's not really as well known, I think, amongst the mainstream crowd. But yeah, the band, they're an English band. They start actually in 1967, but they all went to school together. And there's the 5 original members are Peter Gabriel, the most famous of the group. He was the lead singer. Then you got Tony Banks, who was the keyboard player. You had Mike Rutherford, who played bass. Anthony Phillips played guitar, and Chris Stewart played drummer. It was the drummer. He played the drums, and he was the drummer. And they all went to school together in Surrey, England. So it's one of those things where it's like, wow, it just happened. Everybody was in the right place at the right time. They all started bands together and eventually formed their own band. and eventually formed this famous band called Genesis. So it's kind of crazy how he had all these very talented musicians in one area at the same time, the same school, and that's how it came about. Yeah, so they basically were, they all were interested in, and they're all teenagers here, and they're all forming their own bands in school. Basically, there's two different bands, and those two bands broke up, and basically, the band basically starts with actually Rutherford and Banks, I believe it was, kind of got together and started writing music together and tried to form their own band. Interesting enough. And then they, of course, needed other members, so they then recruited the other members into the band, and they started making their own demo tapes. And luckily enough, they had kind of an in the music industry, because there's a school alumni named Jonathan King, who was involved in music producing in the UK. In fact, had produced a song that was a hit song in the UK. So he was had enough in the business that he could help them out, of course. So they reached out to Jonathan King, gave him the demo tapes, and Jonathan King took them to, Decca Records, and they ended up getting signed on by Decca Records very young. Like I said, they're all between the ages of 15 and 17. So young teenagers, and now they got a record deal with Decca to make some songs and try to make hits out of them. So very, very young, when they first started out here, which I thought was actually very interesting. So they come out with a single called The Silent Sun in 1968. Like I said, the band really starts in 67. Their first single comes out in 68. It doesn't chart in UK. Of course, I don't think it came out anywhere in the US, but didn't really do anything. They did some other singles. None of that did anything. So at first, the singles were not doing much. And they were, also, I should say, they were coming up with Jonathan King basically became their manager, I guess you can say, music producer, was kind of in charge of the group. And he came up with the name Genesis. They were coming up with different names, and he came up with Genesis because he saw this as the beginning of his producing career. So he kind of came up with the idea of Genesis being a name for beginning, of course, because Genesis is the first book in the Bible. Genesis always means the first, the beginning. So yeah, so it was all kind of his idea, name it Genesis, which they took it, and they were fine with that, and so they were called Genesis. Chris Stewart, the drummer, though, quit because he didn't feel like they weren't having much success, and so he wanted to pursue school. So he quit the band to go pursue education, and so they then got a drummer named John Silver, replaced him at this time. I said the singles weren't doing very well, so Jonathan King decided that maybe they should put out an album, that an album would be better than putting out singles, and if he can put out a good album, maybe he can get the band going. So he kind of, and of course, as we know, Genesis, and I said, it sounds like Rutherford and Banks or Phillips were kind of the leaders of the band. They were writing the music for the band, and they were really into going more the prog rock route. They like to write very intricate music, very long songs with a lot of changes and stuff like that. So they were more into doing a prog rock style, but Jonathan King told them that you won't get anywhere in the prog rock, or he doesn't think they'll be successful, that they need to do more, commercial sounding, more of a pop sound. They would have a better chance of being successful. So their ideas kind of got nixed because of that. And so instead they went more of a pop rock route. And Jonathan King kind of came up with this idea for the first album. Of course, the first album is called From Genesis to Revelation, kind of using their name, the band Genesis. And of course, obviously Genesis is the first book of the Bible, Revelation the last book of the Bible. So definitely playing up on the biblical sound of their name and all that. And so, but it was a concept album that Jonathan King came up with. Said, let's do this concept album, kind of doing songs that kind of represent the Bible, I guess, in some sense, at least Genesis and Revelation in the Bible. Anyway, so it kind of went with this kind of crazy idea to start off the band. The album debuts in 1969. It does not do well, does not chart well at all in the UK. It does nothing really. And the big problem was that because it was, one thing is, there was an American band named Genesis as well that, so there were some problems with their band being named Genesis, and they wanted to change their band, but John King didn't want to change the band from Genesis, so the compromise was that they wouldn't put Genesis on the album. And the album's very plain, if I remember right. It's just a black album from Genesis Revelation, but the name of the band isn't on there. That was the compromise. So the problem was record places that sold records thought that it was a religious album, so they put it in the religious section, I guess, of the record store. And I think people didn't buy it because they just saw it and thought, oh, it's just some religious album. It's not a pop rock album, you know. And so that definitely hurt besides not having any hit singles off the album, that really hurt the album. It, again, did not sell well. So it was not a great idea by Jonathan King, it sounds like, and ultimate failure for the band. And so then they part ways. Jonathan King part ways with the band and also Decca Records. So they signed on with Decca Records, made one album, failed, and they were out of Decca Records. So they're back to the start where they're trying to come up with songs and trying to get signed on with somebody. So not a great beginning to the band, nevertheless to say. So then Silver, John Silver, who was the drummer, ends up leaving the band, and they replace him. They audition some drummers, and they get a guy named John Mayhew, who was a carpenter, I guess, at the time. And it sounds like they didn't get along. Not that they didn't get along, but that they were just two different, what do you call it? They were, I guess, more middle class, and he was more working class. And I don't know why that would be a big difference, but it sounds like they had some differences, and they never really gelled together. But anyways, John Mayhew was their drummer. And so they were making, of course, they're, like I said, without Jonathan King in the picture, they're like, okay, we want to do more prog rock, which from what I know of prog rock, like I said, it's just very long songs, lots of key changes and all this, lots of time signature changes. They're very complicated, you know, songs, and not usually good for the radio. You usually don't play long, complicated songs on the radio. You want short, catchy songs, you know, that people will listen to and get hooked in, you know, and then want to buy your album. You know, that's kind of the record. So I don't know why they thought that was the best way to go. But that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to go prog rock, which just happened kind of with Rush, had a kind of similar situation as well. Their first album failed, and it was more of a hard rock record, and then they really wanted to go prog rock after that as well. Anyway, so that was kind of the direction they really wanted to go with the group. And so they were making demos, and they were getting them out there, and they were playing live shows, of course, and their live shows were doing pretty well in that area, evidently. And they got noticed by a guy named John Anthony from Charisma Records. Yeah. And he saw them, thought they were pretty good. Then he brought his boss named Tony Stratton Smith to also see them, and he liked them, and so they signed him on to a deal with Charisma Records. And so this was kind of the second, luckily, you know, second chance for them to get some success, hopefully. Like I said, the first album was pop. Their second album, very prog rock, as you would call it. And again, for me, I'm not a big fan of prog rock. I like more of the pop rock stuff or hard rock, but not the really long, complicated, weird songs. I'm not really into that as much. So needless to say, I'm not hugely into the first part of the band. And a lot of the first albums, I don't like all that much. Like I said, from Genesis Revelation, kind of a weak. I do like that it's not a prog rock album, that is more of a pop rock album. I wouldn't say there's a lot of great standout songs. I think Turn the Sour to Sweet, I think was pretty good. That's the opener. I think it's my favorite now. Fireside Song was my favorite, but I think I switched to that. But Fireside Song I thought was decent too, but nothing really stands out in that album. So it's not one of their strong albums for sure. And their second album they come out with is called Trespass. Comes out in 1970. Like I said, very prog rock. Doesn't do well, does not sell very well, does not chart very well in the UK. Doesn't do, a lot of these early stuff does nothing in the US and just charts very low in the UK itself. Again, not a big fan of this album. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Again, don't really like the long prog songs. My favorite song off the album is Visions of Angels. I thought it was the most decent, but still not a song that's really high up for me. Yeah, so then Anthony Phillips, who was, you know, one of the really big member of the group. I mean, like I said, I think it was him and Rutherford that kind of really started the band and played together and really was writing the first, was big writers of the music, along with Tony Banks. Well, he ends up leaving the band, which was a huge huge miss for the band, missing their lead guitar player, who was also a big reason why they started the band, kind of one of the big founding members of the band. And it said that he had stage fright at this point, which is weird because it's like they've been playing live for this long and now he's starting to have stage fright. So I don't know exactly what happened there, but they said that he was getting sick a lot. He was feeling ill. And I guess maybe the nerves were getting to him and he was feeling sick. And so he decided to quit the band because it was just too much, probably anxiety for him, and so forth. So huge hit for them. Their lead guitar player, basically, and founding member, quits the band. They also ended up firing Mayhew, the drummer, because they felt like he wasn't a good enough drummer for the band, and they wanted to get a better drummer. And like I said, they felt like he was this working class guy, and they were more, I guess, middle class or something like that. Whatever. So they fire him. Good news is they found a really good drummer to replace him, and one of the most important members of the band, which is pretty crazy. As you probably know, it is Phil Collins. So Phil Collins, it's crazy that he didn't start with the group. In fact, he comes in, he's their, fourth drummer, and then he's a drummer from then on, basically, to the end of the band. But to get one of the most successful, singer-songwriters of the 80s and 90s as the drummer of your band here. I mean, what a great get, and all the stars aligned, and you just happen to get this incredible talent as your new drummer, and was the best decision that they ever made is getting Phil Collins in, and took him to, I think, even higher charting later on. And all that. And it makes me wonder, like, if Phil Collins never joined Genesis, would Genesis ever reach the heights they did? And would Phil Collins ever reach the heights that he did? It feels like that was such an important moment for both Genesis and Phil Collins. Like, Phil Collins may never have been the big name if it wasn't for getting on Genesis at this point and all this, because it wasn't until he got into Genesis, because I don't think he ever thought himself as a lead singer or a songwriter. I think he just saw himself as a drummer, from what I know. But he could sing. He was a good... What was really good is that he can good drummer, but also could sing backing vocals really well. So it was a great get, because like, oh, here's a guy who can drum and can sing backing vocals. I don't think they ever thought that he was ever going to be like a huge lead singer guy that's going to be, and a songwriter and all that, and be this huge, success as he is. So it was just kind of crazy. That all kind of worked out just right for Phil Collins and for them. So yeah, so he sees they're auditioning drummers, and he sees an invite and goes and plays and gets hired pretty much right away. Of course, they also were looking for a new guitar player as well at this time, and they eventually get a guitar player named Steve Hackett, who actually, he was looking for a band. Peter Gabriel saw him advertising to find a band, and sounded like he liked prog rock as well. So Peter Gabriel invited him to audition, and he came audition, and they liked what they heard. So there's our new members: Phil Collins, drummer; Steve Hackett as new lead guitar player. So at this point, let's see. Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss an album here, because I had Trespass. I think Nursery Crime is the next album. And this, again, didn't particularly do well either, charting wise and all that. Again, another album I'm not a big fan of. Big prog rock, long songs. Seven Stones is pretty good on the album. That's my favorite. Again, it's towards the bottom of my list of albums for me. I know people that love those albums, though. People that love prog rock, the people in my group that love prog rock, love that album, I think. Trespass and Nursery Crime. They like both those albums. Most everybody doesn't like, from Genesis Revelations, mostly towards the bottom of everybody's list, basically. But yeah, so then we get to, actually, again, they're having 3 albums in, not a lot of success. I'd always thought, like, how did they keep going? In fact, there has been times where they almost thought about quitting the band, but they decided to keep going. They really wanted to make music their career, full-time job, you know. And yeah, so they kept going. In fact, Phil Collins joined the group because he didn't know, he kind of knew of Genesis, he heard the name. They weren't famous really, but he kind of, I guess, knew about them. And he knew that they got work and they were making records. So he joined because he thought, well, if nothing else, I'll have a job for a while, you know, until something happens and I'll get a different job. But I don't think even Collins thought, oh, I'm joining this really great band and I'll be famous, you know. It was just a gig kind of thing. Who knew? Yeah, so their fourth album actually becomes, it's one of those things where it's like, man, if they kept making bad album after bad album, or I say bad album, I mean, album that doesn't chart very well after album that doesn't chart very well, like they probably eventually would have to, they'd get dropped by the record company. They might quit because they feel like, oh, we're not going anywhere, and they might quit and start other bands and try again. That happens a lot where if you don't have chart success, in fact, when I was doing Steely Dan did a lot. They joined a band, didn't do very well. That band, you know, it was gone. And then the two members of Steely Dan, you know, would do another band, and they kept doing that until finally they found the right combination, you know. That's just kind of works in the music industry. But the fourth album did well enough to really keep them going. I think this is definitely a huge album in their discography, a very important album in discography, and that's Foxtrot. And if you've heard any album, you probably heard of Foxtrot. I've heard of Foxtrot before I even heard the album. I feel like if the album you're gonna see mostly on lists of like 100 favorite albums, whatever, or 100 greatest albums, the one album you might see from Genesis is Foxtrot. That seems to be everybody's favorite album. In fact, the people in my group, like I said, a lot of them, their favorite albums is Foxtrot. So it definitely has culturally been the biggest, one of the biggest albums for them, critically, and you know, in the people that love music, it's a huge album for them and really got them into Genesis. But yeah, it ends up actually being a fairly successful. It went number 12 in the UK, the best charting so far, almost top 10. So that really kept them going, luckily, because I feel like if they had another dud, who knows, they might have broken up. But because Foxtrot, again, it doesn't have a huge hit in it. What it's most well known for is it has a 23-minute song called Supper's Ready. And again, 23 minutes. Can you believe that? 23 minutes. That's the longest song I've ever heard, maybe. I know Rush has a song that's also in 2112 that's very long as well, about 20-some minutes long, which is absolutely insane to me that you write a song that long and that people would like it. But I know people in my group, they love Supper's Ready. It's very, you know, experimental. It goes, you know, there's lots of changes within the song. And I think it's supposed to tell a story of some kind. It's a very weird song. I'm not a fan of it. To me, it's just a really weird song. I don't know what's going on, what the song's about, what they're talking about. I don't know. If you're like me, if you're more of a casual listener, if you just like the popular stuff, you might not enjoy it. Again, I'm not a prog rock guy, but people that like prog rock really love Supper's Ready on Foxtrot. And yeah, Foxtrot, very popular amongst people that are hardcore music fans, I would say, and are Genesis fans and like collecting records and all that. For me, Foxtrot is one of my least favorite. It's like towards the very bottom. Like there's not one song I like on that album, and I really don't like Supper's Ready. That is way too long of a song. I mean, to me, 7 minutes is like too long. We need the 7 minutes to be like, this better be a darn good song to get to 7 minutes, or you're wasting my time. 23 minutes, you're really wasting my time. Anyways, but yeah, it's I can't say anything. I give it a 6 out of 10. I think it's worse than the other 3 albums before it. And it's funny. I'm different than other people who love that album. I can't take that album. It's too much for me. Too much prog rock for me personally. But that's just my musical taste, anyways. A couple things also at this time. The band became Peter Gabriel. Like I said, well, I feel like there's a change in the band with Peter Gabriel, where he was the lead singer. And he's a very good lead singer. But like I said, I felt like it was Rutherford and like Phillips and maybe Banks that was really writing the songs and really, directing the path of the band. But Peter Gabriel, of course, as happens when you're the lead singer, you're the front man of the group. You're more visible to everybody. Everybody thinks about the front man more than the people in the back playing necessarily. So Peter Gabriel at this time, I think, is starting to take more control of the band, and because he's the one everybody's starting to talk about. And a lot of that's because he decided to be very theatrical in the live shows and dress up in different costumes and stuff like that. And so he kind of becomes more noticed in the band because of this crazy theatrics, which I didn't know any of this going in. Because Peter Gabriel, I know he's like this, I don't know much about Peter Gabriel except that he has some hit songs in the 80s I'm just aware of. But so this is kind of a crazy discovery when my friends told me, oh, you have to watch a YouTube video of him singing Supper's Ready. He gets in these crazy costumes and does these, very theatrical, like acting out the scenes of the song. And I'm like, wow, I had no idea Peter Gabriel is like this crazy person that that dressed up in crazy costumes and did crazy stuff on stage. Like, to me, if I was watching that, I'd be like, I'm out of here. This is too crazy for me. But yeah, so I kind of got him noticed though, and he came a little more bigger in the band and became more famous. I feel like he started taking more direction and controlling of the band itself at this point. I know one of the big ones, like Foxtrot, I think on the album there's a picture of like a fox in a dress, and I think he put a dress on and put a fox head on and came out on stage. And so I'm like, oh, that's just crazy. But that kind of helps. I suppose that helps you get noticed. So everybody's like, oh, let's go see. Remember he wore a fox head in a dress. Like, I want to see what crazy stuff they're doing next. So maybe that helped them out a little bit. But anyways, that's kind of stuff Peter Gabriel's doing, kind of becoming more in front, I think, of the group. In other words, their fifth album, Selling England by the Pound, comes out in 1973. I'm probably forgetting the dates on these, but I think Foxtrot's like around 72 or so, because the next album, Selling England by the Pound, 1973. And again, it was successful. It went number 3 in the UK. I mean, so even better than Foxtrot. And it's one of those things where they're starting to gain some momentum. So each album does a little bit better than the next one because people are kind of interested in what's coming out next and all that. Again, Selling England by the Pound. Again, it's an album people generally like that I know that are Genesis fans. This is another favorite of them. Me, again, it's like Foxtrot. I don't like this album at all. It gets a 6 out of 10 for me. My favorite song is More Fool Me. But even that's not a great song, but there's just not a lot to pick from. Like I said, there's these albums, their songs are very long and there's not a lot of them. There's like only maybe 7 songs in each album, 6 or 7 songs on an album. And none of them really stand out for me. None of them are hit songs. None of them I've ever heard of anyway. So, but yeah, not a big fan, but I know people that like Genesis really like Selling England by the Pound. It's more of the same of what they've been doing at this point. Yeah, so we're coming up to the 6th album. The 6th album is called Lamb Lies Down at Broadway. It comes out in 1974. This is a double album, and it's kind of a rock opera type album. It's supposed to tell this story, this character. So it's a very story-driven, which is very common among prog rock bands. They love telling long stories and having long albums. And so this is their first time doing that, pretty much the only time they did it in their career. And it's really Peter Gabriel was kind of the main person who wrote this. He kind of came up with the story idea, I think, and the name, and wrote a lot of the songs on here. So it's almost like it was his baby, basically. He was kind of the mastermind behind this whole album idea and doing this. And this is when we get a lot of friction within the band. Peter Gabriel is coming, like I said, more controlling because he was more famous, because he was the one out doing all the crazy theatrics and being written about mostly. And he's also a very good singer. I really like Peter Gabriel's voice, I have to say. Even though I'm more of a Phil Collins guy, Peter Gabriel does have a very good voice. Anyway, so he's kind of coming up with these crazy ideas. But a lot of stuff's happening with Peter Gabriel. His first wife, or his wife's first child, she was having a lot of trouble with the pregnancy. So he's spending a lot of time at home with her and not in the studio with the band. And so I think that there's some friction there with the band, feeling like he's not around enough. And then he's feeling like the band's not supporting him through this troubled time. So like I said, a lot of friction there. Also, William Friedkin, I think it was, wanted him to write a screenplay, but then that never went anywhere. He didn't end up writing a screenplay, but there was a time where he was working on a screenplay because he was getting paid to. So he was doing that instead of working on the album. Stuff like that. And a lot of the choices he made, the other band members didn't like so much. And like I said, it felt like he was getting too big for the band. And I think the band didn't like that. That it felt like everybody talked about him and nobody talked about them. So it was almost one of those things where his ego was getting too big and the rest of the band didn't like it. So yeah, lots of friction within the band, unfortunately, coming up with this last, and lots of arguments within the band. Anyways, but they come out with this album, Lamb Lies Down Broadway. It goes number 10 in the UK, so still a top 10 album in the UK, still doing pretty good. They're doing pretty good in the UK anyways. And it went number 41 in the US, so it's the best that they've done in the US so far. So far, they had not charted very well in the US, but this time they were number 41. Still not like great, but not, it's something. But I thought I actually kind of like Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which you would think I wouldn't. Again, it's this very weird story, theatrical thing. I'm not always a big fan of these style. I do like Tommy though from The Who though, so I can enjoy these kind of albums at times. And my friends all thought I'd hate this album. I thought I would too. And then I listened to it and I was like, I kind of liked it. I thought the music actually was really pretty good. There's some pretty good songs here. I thought Peter Gabriel sang very well throughout. So overall, actually, it's one of my favorite Genesis albums. I give it an 8 out of 10, which is a solid score for an album. Anyway, so it's actually up there for my albums. And I think it's kind of a crazy one, but I think worth a listen, in my opinion. And this, again, more the prog rock days. Like, I don't like a lot of their prog rock stuff. This is one of their best prog rock style albums for me. Most of my favorite are going to be later on with Phil Collins' more poppier stuff. But the song that really got me is Carpet Crawlers. That's my favorite song off the album. Love that song. It's one of my favorite Genesis songs. And what a cool discovery. When I was listening to the album and Carpet Crawlers comes on, I'm like, this song is so amazing. It's epic. The way it crescendos, gets louder as it goes on, gets more, the instruments come in more towards the end. Peter Gabriel just gets better as the song goes. And the background singers are great. That chorus is amazing. One of the great choruses. If you never heard it, it's not a big name song, I don't think, but I think that's one song I'd say if you need to check out a Genesis song, I would say check out Carpet Crawlers. That song is amazing. I absolutely love that song. When I heard it the first time, I was like, wow, I gotta listen to it again. And I was listening to that song multiple times. Every day I was like listening to Carpet Crawlers, just singing along to it. It's fun to sing to, and just going, wow, this is just an incredible song written and everything. So yeah, so that really probably what helps me love this album as much, more than the other albums. So out of the first six albums, this is by far my favorite one. As I said, the other one's got pretty low scores. This one gets actually a decent score on it overall. But yeah, this ends up being Peter Gabriel's last album though with the group. One of the, people that, started the group. Like I said, too much friction going on, and Peter Gabriel kind of knew he could go solo and start solo career. So after they do the tour, which they do, again, kind of this crazy theatrical tour where they're doing again, I don't think the band cared about that as much as Peter Gabriel, but at the end of the tour, Peter Gabriel basically said, I'm done with the band, I'm quitting, and all that. And maybe the band was okay with that. Like, yeah, we were ready to move on too. So Peter Gabriel, a lot of people love Peter Gabriel. They're their favorite singer in the band. Only does 6 albums really out of 15, so less than half of the albums. I think he's a great singer, but his period's not my favorite just because I'm not a fan of the prog rock stuff. I think if he did more of the pop rock stuff later on, I'd be a bigger fan of Peter Gabriel. But yeah, so it's huge. But again, a huge hit for the band, losing a very good singer. And there's a wonder, will they ever get a singer as good as Peter Gabriel? How are they going to move on? We'll get to that next video. I'm already going long on this one. This will definitely be a 2-parter. So next time we'll continue on what happens with the band, who becomes the lead singer, where do they go? So please continue watching on the next video to get more of my thoughts on this band and kind of the history behind them. And hope you enjoyed this long video on the first part. So much to say about Genesis. It's a very interesting career that they had, I think, and to go through anyway. So thank you for watching this video. Thank you for liking it. Please comment what you think about the band and these first 6 albums. Love the reading comments anyways. And just thank you to all the subscribers for supporting the channel. I appreciate you all and hope you have a good day.